There is evidence linking diet and nutrition to most diseases and more so non-communicable diseases. Today's conversation centers on how poor nutrition can directly cause these diseases. My name is Aida Munzati and Health Nuggets starts now. So how do you eat your food and eat it right? Today we are joined by Dr. Peter Mokaya, the founder and director of Organic Consumers Alliance and also the board member of Non-Communicable Diseases Alliance. Thank you very much, Dr. for your time and for joining us on Health Nuggets.
Thank you. Thank you, Aida, for giving me the privilege to be here.
So for starters, we are discussing nutrition and non-communicable diseases. Just to create a base for our audience, what is non-communicable diseases?
Yes, thank you, Aida. That question is a valid question in the sense that sometimes people are not very clear what non-communicable diseases are. By the very nature of that term, it means that there are communicable diseases. Diseases that can be communicated, and a good example of that right now is COVID-19 or the coronavirus. That's transmissible using a pathogen or a germ that infects one, so that the body responds in that context, and you either manifest with symptoms of that disease, or you can be tested and found to have that particular organism. So indeed, there is a difference between infection and disease. So these are the diseases that we classify as infectious diseases, of course, including malaria, the pneumonias, and so on. Yeah, and they are common, and they infect all ranges of age groups. On the contrary, non-communicable diseases are those diseases that you develop or acquire without a vector from outside, for the germ coming from outside. And indeed, they are known as non-communicable. They also tend to take a longer time to manifest, as opposed to the others that have acute symptoms, signs and symptoms. Usually, the non-communicable diseases are as a result of your body system and metabolism not relating properly with external factors, or like what you eat, your lifestyle, what you eat, how you express yourself in tandem with the rest of nature. And those kind of diseases, just to give a quick example, range from diseases like diabetes, which really is a manifestation of a dietary imbalance, a lack of certain nutrients. Yeah, not often affect people who are overweight or obese. Yeah, heart diseases and cardiovascular diseases, usually related with high blood pressure, because the blood vessels are congested because of consuming the wrong foods. Diseases like chronic chest infections, like asthma, like disease we call emphysema, or in some cases, one could include even chest cancers. And of course, broadly speaking, that whole arena of cancers. But I must quickly add that more and more these days, we're also seeing a metabolic imbalance of issues related to your brain, your neurological system, your brain function, that you're saying that there is no chronic diseases without mental diseases. So I'm sure as the audience is listening, there's some people saying, let's see whether Dr. Mokaya forgets to mention about mental diseases as part of that gamut of chronic diseases. Of course, there are smaller ones, there are more focused ones, like sickle cell disease, and other hemoglobinopathies, as a big word, basically meaning dysfunctions of how the blood system works. But indeed, there are such like sickle cell, which are kind of genetic related, but they also grouped together under non-communicable diseases. Indeed, a huge gamut of many diseases. Really, other than the genetic ones, the other ones that I mentioned, the diabetes, the blood pressure, the chest issues, the mental conditions, and cancer, of course, which is a big one, oftentimes can be prevented or can avoid manifesting if we eat the right food, we adopt the right lifestyles, including exercise and less sitting like we're sitting right now, and avoid toxins from the environment. We'll discuss that a bit later on. What we eat, things like aflatoxin in maize, issues like having food is sprayed with chemicals, roundups of this world, and other food sprayed chemicals that disturb that balance. When there is an imbalance of the body system and the workings, all the nutrients are not in balance, that's when these chronic diseases manifest. So they're really not something that comes from outside, but made from what you consume, sometimes the air. But basically, there is no germ that comes from outside and manifests as an infection and a disease. The key difference, therefore, between non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases is that to a large extent, we who partake of different kinds of nutrients, which are components of what we consume as food, have a huge control over whether we can manifest these diseases or not. So we are not helpless. Diabetes just doesn't come on you unless, of course, it's type 1. Increasing weight or being overweight is not something that comes from something that bites you or that infects you. It has to do a lot with your choices, lifestyle choices, what you eat, what you drink, what you breathe, what you smoke or don't smoke, and of course, the kind of food you eat and where it's grown, and also whether you are sitting on the TV watching videos all day or you stand up and you stretch your muscles. Yes,
okay, so I'm glad that you've mentioned the types of non-communicable diseases. And you've also mentioned nutrients and what we are ingesting as human beings. So let's just look at the link or a definition of food, dieting, and nutrients. How do they interconnect?
Thank you, Aida, for asking that question. Oftentimes, people confuse those terminologies. What are nutrients? What is food? And what is diet? Yeah, they basically are semantics of the same thing. When you wake up in the morning, you don't go to eat a diet, or neither do you go and eat nutrients. You put food on the table, and that food is made of different components that inside the food which we cannot see are known as nutrients. For example, vitamins, the proteins, the carbohydrates, the fat, the good fat, there's good and bad fat. The trace elements which we can see, the zinc, the iron, the magnesium, the manganese, and selenium, those are components or nutrients that we consume. When you eat a banana, that's food. But again, it's a diet. A diet is either a good diet or a bad diet, is a balanced diet or an imbalanced diet. And of course, a balanced diet is one which has all these components of nutrients in the right amounts that allows you, as you consume the food, to ensure that there is a balance of those different nutrients. And as they say, you are what you eat. So if you're eating a balanced diet that's full of nutrients, that is healthy, then you're going to be healthy. In fact, the default mode of nature is towards balance. It is because we human beings have become, quote unquote, so civilized that we have started eating too much of certain foods and too less of certain foods, or too much of a certain group of foods without creating that balance. For example, the animals, the birds, the cows, the sheep, and the goats out there, the kienyeji chicken, can give an example of kienyeji chicken and broiler chicken. That's a good example. The chicken that eat in the village that are in tandem or naturally feed eat what you would call food that creates a balanced diet. That, therefore, which is in tandem with nature. How we were meant to eat originally until we started living on certain foods, food categories, and consuming more of other food categories. Like now we eat less fruits, we eat less vegetables, and we eat more carbohydrates, more chapatis, mandazis, cakes, and biscuits. And guess what happens? We then create in the body a state of metabolic imbalance. When you create a state of metabolic imbalance, you create a state of being at ease. which therefore is what we define as disease. That's part of the definition of non-communicable diseases. So the other bit of this is that when that imbalance is created, certain enzymatic pathways don't work properly. Then what happens? You add weight, yeah, you may develop diabetes because your insulin is not working properly. You may develop heart disease because you're taking too much cholesterol and your blood vessels are not working properly, so your heart may have what you call a heart attack. Your brain vessels may not work properly because of congestion of the blood vessels in the brain, so that the brain blood doesn't circulate properly. So you have what you call a stroke. A stroke is the equivalent of a heart attack, but it happens in your brain. And this is as a result of, over time, eating certain foods that don't allow your blood vessels to allow easy flow. So it's like a pipe system. The piping system clogs with fat and other things, and because of that, blockage may manifest as a stroke in the brain and as a heart attack in the heart, and also manifests in other organ systems. It affects your liver, your kidneys, and other organs of the system. So at the end of the day, really, the basic cause of what you call chronic disease is a state of metabolic imbalance where these nutrients are not consumed in a balanced way. So really, almost all these heart or chronic diseases, including cancer, are a manifestation of a state of metabolic imbalance. Imbalance equal to disease, is equal to balance. So I think that's a good point to start. And quite frankly, when that occurs, certain functions of the different body systems start malfunctioning. For example, in the case of diabetes, insulin type 1, but because of allergies and so on, you simply don't have enough insulin from childhood, difficult to manage, but also has to do a lot with these external toxins that create a state of an immune reaction that destroys its own cells, in this case in the pancreas, the beta cells in the pancreas. I'm sure you've done this session before. So for me, I think this is for a beginner, it's very important for people to understand that, because your family has a history of heart attack or blood pressure, of overweight, or because your family has a history, a genetic history of diabetes, therefore it is okay to manifest diabetes. We now know that the contribution of the genes, for example, for diabetes, is less than 10%. More than 90% of what causes the expression of diabetes in you or me or anybody else is a lot to do with things that are under our control. The food you eat and the lifestyle you live. Whether you exercise or not, whether you're exposing your body to food that has a lot of toxins like the glyphosates, the Roundup and the other contaminants, whether you're eating safe, healthy, organic food. And how do we know this? We know this because we know people whose families, 3, 4 generations, have had diabetes, both from the father's side and the mother's side. But because the individuals are actively change their lifestyles, they eat the right food, they exercise, they ensure that the insulin is allowed to be sensitive, they have not manifested diabetes type 2. There is evidence for that. So for me, this is a sharing of hope. That when I was in medical school 35 years ago, we were taught that diabetes was not reversible. Once you had diabetes, you're stuck with it until you die. But now, new science has shown that from eating the right foods, the right diet, in some cases, especially type 2, you can actually reverse diabetes completely with just the right foods alone, which is really good news. And the audience needs to hear this. And there is hope. You don't have to be dependent on metformin or insulin all your life and wait until your leg is chopped off, aka amputated, or you go blind. All these horrendous, horrifying complications of diabetes. They don't have to manifest. And the good thing is, this is not dependent on your daktari. It's to a large extent dependent on your own choices. Proactive, deliberate, intentional, mindful choices about what you eat, how you eat, exercise. This is good news. For those who haven't gotten the diabetes, and even for those who already have manifested diabetes, they can to a large extent reduce their doses of insulin, even for type 1. You're not stuck with a high dose of insulin. For type as manifestations of diabetes, there are cases where people have reduced that dose. Of course, you need that insulin, but significantly reduce the dose and the number of times one has to inject themselves. So this is a discussion of good news, especially for the younger people, that there is hope. And it has a lot to do with the choices of the nutrients that you take, the food you consume, Madam Ida.
So of course there is hope if you're consuming the right food.
Yes.
So there's a great prevalence of non-communicable diseases in Kenya. You mentioned of cancers, hypertension, and diabetes.
Yes.
Can you just paint a picture for us of the statistics and the scope of now the non-communicable diseases in Kenya?
Yes. Yes. Different people have pretty much different figures because we don't have a very comprehensive database of those diseases, unfortunately, quite frankly. But generally speaking, if one were to classify them, the three top points would be cancers, blood pressure or hypertension, and diabetes. Pretty much in that order. Some people think that the highest one is hypertension because it's called a silent killer because you don't feel it.
You never know exactly.
See it. Some studies that have been done, for example, in Western Kenya, patchwork, have shown that almost 1 in every 2 adults, listen to that, 1 in every 2 adults, both men and women, have symptoms of hypertension or high blood pressure. That's shocking. In different areas, when you put the national averages, it's 1 in 3 adults. That's about 30%. But in some areas, high-risk areas where there have been a lot of more close studies have been done, we are approaching a level of almost 50%. That's for hypertension. For diabetes, one would probably say 1 in 4, 1 in 5, depending on how one measures. And for cancers, the rate is a little lower. I think that brings it to number 3. But the key thing that we need to accept and embrace as Kenyans is that the rate and the prevalence, the prevalence is the total burden of these conditions, while the incidence is the new cases coming in.
Exactly.
Over the last 10 years, over the last 20 years, over the last 30 years, if I could start with when we left medical school about 35 years ago, that makes me very young, we could hardly see cases of hypertension and diabetes, leave alone cancer, any cancers. 10 years later, and I will show you the correlation with the kind of food we eat, the numbers doubled, more or less, across the board. Yeah, that's 20 years. The last 10 years, from 2010 roughly, up to now, which is about 10 years, these rates of all these NCDs from cancer, diabetes, blood pressure, chest issues, mental diseases, the new one I mentioned, have increased exponentially. There is a difference between arithmetic, where you add the numbers. Exponentially is when the numbers just swing up. So the question is, what has changed? Ida, we cannot say that diabetes is a genetic disease, and that is the reason, therefore, diabetes has gone up almost 5 times what it was 30 years. Very important for the audience to hear. If indeed, like sickle cell, diabetes is a genetic disease or as a result of your genetics, sickle cell hasn't suddenly risen up over the last 10. It hasn't.
It hasn't.
So what is it that has happened that has resulted in diabetes shooting up 3-4 times where it was 20-30 years ago? It is not the genes that changed. The genes are the same. The people who have certain genes are the same. So clearly that's evidence that there is another factor that is the reason why people are manifesting as diabetes. And that reason is basically lifestyle and food. That's where nutrition, like, is another link between nutrition, diet, food, and NCDs.
And the diseases.
Meaning, and I want the audience to hear this, we can do something about it. We can do a lot about it. Reverse that bad lifestyle. What we are consuming, what you're not consuming, and allow the body to move. Homo erectus, Homo habilis, who were meant to spend most of our time standing. Unfortunately, now we spend 60 to 70% of our time doing what? what exactly we're doing. Maybe we should have had this interview standing. We were designed with our backs to be up. When we sit, as we are done, we create pressure on our back. In fact, to be more specific, some people have shown that sitting between 4 to 6 hours, a day, is equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day in terms of the risk factors for all NCDs, from cancer disease to chest, lung disease, to mental diseases, and to all the gamut of non-communicable diseases. So maybe that's for the audience. Just be knowing that when you sit, you're more than smoking. And that's the choice you're making. So you avoid smoking if you're a smoker and start sitting. The risk is similar, if not worse. It's not Dr. Mokaya was just that science which has shown that. And therefore, we need, as a problem, sitting, as a solution, spending more time standing
and being active,
or moving, or being active, etc.
So, of course, you've just said it's not genetic that change. We've also seen that the statistics of these non-communicable diseases in the recent years has really risen. So how do we bring these numbers down? What are we supposed to do right?
Thank you, Aida. That's, for me, the easy part in theory, and in practice, the very difficult part, because it involves two key issues. Policy frameworks from the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, because, you know, I tell medics, I'm a medical practitioner, that food is not in the domain of health. Food is the domain of agriculture. The agriculturists produce food. This food is consumed by people to give them good health. And of course, agriculture operates within the context of the environment, whether there is sewage, where there is chemical pollutions like heavy metals, like mercury, flowing in the rivers and polluting the Victoria. So really, as a solution, I think we need to work from those two levels, the level of policy framework and the level of consumer awareness. And Ida, this is the reason why we're having this discussion. Yeah, somewhere in the Holy Book they say, my people perish for lack of knowledge.
Now so, we're giving them knowledge.
Yeah, we're giving them knowledge. We need to let them know that most of these diseases can be prevented or can even be reversed in some cases from the kind of food we eat. So at the population level, knowledge about the right foods to consume, natural foods, the variety of foods, mostly vegetables, grown without pesticides and chemicals and herbicides, and all these things we buy in the grocery shops, and like your grandmother and my grandmother and grandfathers and grandparents grew food, eaten wholesomely in a combination, cooked with very little fat and very little oils. All these trans fats that we buy, and they are got funny labels of heart-friendly, as much as possible, cook food, steam it, eat it with as minimal fat as possible. And if you have to cook, use saturated fats like the creams, like the geese, to a certain extent. Our grandfathers and grandmothers knew that. So we could go into details like that, but I think for this point in time, let me just say that the solution is, in theory, very easy, in practice, very difficult, because it involves change. Sugar is addictive. Most of the foods we eat right now are in the category of carbohydrates. And carbohydrates, especially sugar, is addictive. Once your brain centers are used to eating this kind of foods, the mandazis, the chapatis, the bread, the pastries, we are eating an improportionately large amount of carbohydrates. And unfortunately, we are eating the highly processed carbohydrates, the group that I mentioned, high in sugar, high in sugars, and that don't have fiber. Like there's a difference between eating maize from a cob, eating sweet potatoes that are roots or tubers, eating ndumas, because these are, if they're grown in an environment that has no toxins, those foods complemented with proteins, complemented with a little fat from milk or from coconuts or from avocado, which are the good fats, or from olive oil if you can access it. A little egg here and there. The egg yolk has got good cholesterol. People, many times they say that egg was bad. Egg, if it's grown without antibiotics and other toxins, the egg from kienyeji chicken is very good. And people know that. Why do you think organic or kienyeji eggs cost double the broiler eggs? People are not stupid. It's not just sweet with the yellowness, but it also has a higher level of the good fats. The body knows. So this is why, for example, I'm sure you know, a tray of Kenyaji eggs is double the price of these other eggs.
Eggs, exactly.
300, 600, or 350, 400 to 700 sometimes. Because the body recognizes there are more nutrients in these kind of foods. That are more natural, that are more traditional, that are more combined, and that have less exposure to factory processing, where we add sugar, we add salt, we add other chemicals. Where that's where the pizzas come in, the bread comes in, the pastries, the cakes, and all these other foods that we process, including wheat flour products. They are not good at all. And people are talking about gluten intolerance as another factor we discuss. It's not so much about the wheat changing and having gluten. It is because of those chemical, agrochemical residues like the glyphosate, aka Roundup, aka these herbicides, that whose residues, when you consume, they disturb the gut microbiota, all those good bacteria in the stomach, who generate a good immune system. And I just want to mention before you cut me off.
Okay.
One of the other factors that comes in here is the immune system. Among the things that go haywire when you manifest with metabolic conditions, all that I mentioned, including in your brain, is that your immune system is in a state of imbalance. And that's why, Aida, people who have NCDs, the diabetes, the blood pressure, the cancers, and other chronic conditions, we call comorbidities. Big word meaning that they are more susceptible to COVID-19 disease manifestations and are more likely to succumb, unfortunately, to death. So you can see how these things link as COVID link with NCDs, NCDs with nutrients and food and nutrition, and goes back to the soil. So really I must mention that it starts with the soil, what we eat, and how we ourselves balance what we do, and whether we stand up and walk or we sit down all day and keep on hogging, taking the carbohydrates, taking the coffee and the sugar and the tea and the mandazi and the donuts and the cakes, and of course we then stress our system and everything basically goes haywire. So the root cause of almost all NCDs, in summary, is the same. We eat it, breathe it, we drink it, and we fail to allow our body to move as we were originally designed. So it's very simple in principle, and yet in practice it's very difficult. I'm sure you know that.
Exactly.
Yes.
So maybe just to summarize,
Yes.
you've said there are very simple things
Yes.
that one can adapt to, but in real sense they are very difficult.
Yes.
So how do we adapt to this lifestyle?
Yeah, well, again, behavioral change starts with, first of all, accepting the problem. You know, they say you can take a horse to water, but you can't force the horse to drink the water. Yeah, many medical people know about protection of certain diseases, and some doctors, well, not many, still smoke cigarettes. So the discordance between knowledge and practice is based, in my view, on three key things. First of all, the need for this kind of awareness to be passed on enough so that people at a personal level, take responsibility. For me, it's either responsibility or being irresponsible. Once you come to a position at a personal level, this is not a group thing, but there is a need for you, you have an obligation to yourself and to those around you to live a healthy, responsible, and meaningful life and give back to society and avoid being a burden to others. Then you make a personal, a very deeply personal decision with support from those around you. If you're around smokers and smoking all the time, you will likely continue smoking. If you're around people who drink or who are obese or who are fat, they basically say, show me your friends and I will tell you your character. So there is a need for a personal decision to try and extricate oneself from the kind of environment that exposes you to those toxins or those bad habits. And I cannot conclude without saying that you truly are what you eat. Nobody to eat what you eat. You make a deliberate, proactive, meaningful, mindful decision to eat what you eat and to exercise or not to exercise. So that then brings us back to the point that food can be medicine, but food can also be poison.
Poison. Exactly.
Yes, yes.
So it's a conversation that can go on
Yes,
and on. There are time is not allowing us. Maybe you can just give our audience a takeaway or a recap of what we've just discussed.
Yes. Yeah, basically, Ida, you know, that's what I would say, that good people, fellow Kenyans or citizens of this world, we have an obligation not only to ourselves, but to the rest of humanity, and indeed to the rest of the ecosystem. Over the years, I have come to realize, very amazingly, that as a doctor, I was trained in how to mop the floor, to wait until the tap is leaking, the water goes onto the floor, and I carry my mop and I mop the floor. While I appreciate my colleagues who are still busy in the clinics mopping the floor, it's not a very wise thing to do to just spend all your life mopping the floor. You wait until diabetes manifests, cancer happens, or blood pressure, or whatever other NCD, but to also participate in fixing the leaking tap. Fixing the leaking tap is not the job of the daktari, it's the job of every single Kenyan to mind what they eat, whether it is safe, whether it's balanced, to mind moving around, exercising, so they can allow their body to heal.
So indeed, daktari, it's a personal decision to make on what you're consuming as an individual.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for sharing that great information with our audience today.
Thank you very much, Aida. I look forward to another opportunity to share.
Of course.
Thank you.
Asante.
Asante sana.
Well, indeed, there is so much wealth in health, and as a daktari has said, it's very simple and a personal decision to make. So let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, you can send in your comments and queries on our social media pages as displayed down below on your screen. My name is Aida Munzati. Until next time, your health matters.